Simon Stone has appeared, which he only tends to do in person when there's a seismic football story to report on, and that would appear to be the case, Simon.
Yes. Which one?
Well, let's start with Everton.
Yes, so I came in the studio expecting to speak about Manchester United. I'm going to be speaking about Everton, who have been, in the last 5 minutes, deducted 10 points by the Premier League for irregularities over their financial fair play submissions. The Premier League have issued a 41-page document backing up their verdict, which I've not had time to go through yet, but I have looked at Everton's response. Everton say they will appeal, and within that, they say the club does not recognise the finding that it failed to act with the utmost good faith. So I assume somewhere in that 41 pages is the Premier League saying that Everton didn't act with the utmost good faith. The 10 points is deducted immediately. It puts Everton second bottom of the Premier League
on goal difference.
Now, it has been suggested that if there was ever a season where this record punishment was going to apply, this might be it, because the clubs currently towards the bottom of the Premier League are not doing that well. And actually, even with a 10-point deduction, Everton are only 2 points away from Luton, who now move fourth bottom because they only have 6 points.
There are other implications of this. I would have thought that, I've forgotten what the table looked like at the end of last season, but Everton saved themselves, I think, on the last day, didn't they? So there might be other relegated teams. There might be relegated teams from last season from the Premier League who'll be thinking, well, this relates to a period, i.e. last season. So really, they should, those. I mean, you can't get unrelegated, I know, no. But I mean, there's the possibility of legal action, compensation sort, or something.
Well, within this statement, the Premier League are referring to. Let me just look at it. A further decision by the chair of the commission regarding applications from Leicester, Burnley, Southampton, Leeds and Nottingham Forest. And so we're talking about the clubs who were involved at the bottom of the table last year. This is only 5 pages long, but I don't have time to go through it now. But at the end, it's saying that if the complaint is upheld, the Commission may wish to award compensation to one or more of the applicant clubs. So I assume within the 5 pages, that means that they have been given licence to lodge complaints legally, but they need to be heard. But as you say, there are clubs there who got relegated because they would argue Everton breached the rules, and they would feel as though that they are due some kind of compensation for that.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much for that, Simon. Stick around if you can. Don't run off. I might yet need you. Well, I've got to come back to you on the Man United takeover if you can, because there's some news on that. But let's just go to an Everton fan, Peter McFarlane. Well, look, I don't know what the rights and wrongs of this are. If they've broken the rules, they've broken the laws. But I'm gutted for Everton fans. I mean, you've had enough to put up with, and now this.
Yeah, it's shocking news, to be honest with you. I'm actually disgusted with the decision. I think certainly, even if you just take it down to its most basic level, if a club goes into administration, the Premier League rules state that it's a 9-point deduction. For us to be punished even further than a club going into administration and being insolvent, I think is absolutely disgraceful. I can't for the life of me understand how Everton has been made an example of, given other clubs, financial behaviour over the years. There's a case pending against other clubs, as we well know. And I can't for the life of me understand why Everton seems to have been the target of such a strong and unjust punishment.
The thing is, I mean, neither you or I, well, I don't know, you might be, but I'm not a lawyer, and neither are you, and if it's justified, it's justified. I mean, everybody who's ever been sort of convicted of anything say, well, what about the other people doing the same thing? I mean, that's, you kind of got to accept it, haven't you? And look, you could get away with it in terms of relegation here, couldn't you? Because, you're probably good enough to get out of it if you're only 2 points off safety.
I think, though, if you talk about certainly from a legal perspective, if you look at, the punishment fit for crime, well, there were 6 clubs who tried to break away from the Premier League and tried to destroy football in this country as we know it, and they were fined a total of £3 million each. They were given no points deduction, and all of the noise that we heard was that you can't punish the fans, and ultimately it's the fans who are going to be punished, and it's us who are taking the brunt of it. Now, Evertonians were dragged through the mud last season by a number of people when we were protesting against the board and against the running of the club. And what I would say to that is, well, we were fully justified in having concerns about how the club was being run. A lot of the board members have left, unfortunately. Obviously, Mr. Kenwright, passed away recently, which obviously is terrible news. But Farhad Mashiri, who is at the top of all this, is looking to sell the club. So he's already looking to get out of this situation. It's the fans who are left. It's the fans, it's Everton and the community, it's all the things that this football club does for the city of Liverpool and the wider community. We're the ones who suffer. This punishment is, you can talk about a football club in sort of very tribalistic terms if you've got rival fans and things like that, but the reality is it's us who are going to suffer. And the city of Liverpool that suffers as well. Because as I say, Everton Football Club isn't just about the football. The amount of work that Everton Football Club does in this community and helps the city as a whole, we're all being punished for something. And as I say, in terms of does the punishment fit the crime, if a team goes into administration, they get less of a points deduction as what we've got.
Okay, I mean, Simon, how long will the appeal go on for? I mean, are the points not deducted until the appeal's concluded, or are they deducted with immediate effect?
No, I think they're deducted with immediate effect, and I suppose the Premier League being what it is, there will be an open-ended amount of time this could take, but clearly, if we're talking about points being deducted on the league table as it stands, well, clearly any appeal has to be judged, surely, by the end of this season. How could it possibly go on?
But even that could be mad. They could be, or they could go on a run now and then suddenly get 10 points back, and suddenly they could be right at the top.
Well, I think that is fair. And as I said before, I think this season is a season, they are currently, or they will be, 2 points off safety. So it's one win. I don't think the punishment in itself is going to relegate Everton. It will put them closer in the immediate term, but I don't see anything that has suggested to me that Everton are going to struggle to get 2 more points than Luton over the rest of the season. But I do think it looks bad for Everton. It's a stain on the club's character. So whether the club wish to pursue this, saying you're going to appeal and actually appealing are 2 different things, clearly. But it is a stain on the character of the football club.
Well, we've had the statement, which I think you've kind of... We kind of knew this, what they're going to say from what you told us earlier from their response, but the club saying shocked and disappointed, wholly disproportionate and unjust sporting sanction. They're going to appeal, and the club's case will be heard by an appeal board appointed pursuant to the Premier League's rules in due course. Everton insists it's been open and transparent in the information it's provided to the Premier League. It's always respected the integrity of the process, doesn't recognise the findings, and it does not understand. It does not understand to have been an allegation made by the Premier League during the course of proceedings. The club does not recognise the finding that it failed to act with the utmost good faith, and it does not understand this to have been an allegation made by the Premier League during the course of proceedings. And talk about the harshness and severity, and then they're not going to comment on any further until the appeal process has concluded. I mean, I think is this the first points deduction in the Premier League?
I thought there was a previous points deduction for Middlesbrough, was it, that got a points deduction for not playing a game? I'd need to check that.
Oh, yes.
And then they argued that they got relegated because of that. But that was because Brian Robson claimed that he didn't have the right amount of players, and it was ruled that he did. But obviously that's in the midst of time. But
you sense, I mean, that was slightly different, but you kind of sense a taboo's been sort of broken here.
Yeah.
Then other clubs with these things hanging over them, then they're now thinking, well, blimey, we've all been thinking, well, they wouldn't dare, would they? Well, in Everton's case, so we got Man City, for example. There's 115
charges, yes,
against them.
So, I mean, Manchester City have got 115 charges. We're well aware of those. Some are not compliant. The historical, who knows when that case is going to be come to a decision. What I do know, earlier this season or in the summer, the Wolves chairman Jeff Shee gave a very impassioned statement around Lopetegui leaving, and it was to do with why the club had not spent huge amounts of money in the transfer window that Lopetegui wanted, and that was because he wanted the club to stay within FFP.
Let's just bring Neville Southall in, an Everton legend, it's fair to say. Nev, thanks for coming on. What's your reaction to this?
Well, I think it's been common, hasn't it? So it's no surprise. But I don't. At the end of the day, I think they know it's coming. So I think they must have an appeal ready. And I think if they're going to do Everton, they must be doing other clubs as well, because otherwise, discriminate against one club. And I think most clubs go over their limit. So look, the club's been mismanaged for a long, long time. It's culmination in maybe this, but I can see him getting an appeal. Maybe if it comes back again and another appeal, it might not be till the end of the season, so we might not get it till the beginning of next season. So it's not as doom and gloom as I first thought, to be fair.
I mean, if you're a player, and not to say a fan, isn't there an argument for your sanities to go, all right, it's wrong, it's happened, let's forget about it, forget about the appeal, we're only 2 points off safety, let's show two fingers off, to everybody and just go for it, and not have this feeling we're going to get these 10 points back for some reason, just focus on getting out of this hole.
Yeah, and I looked at the game Saturday, and in the back of my mind was, well, if they win today, then we won't be too badly off, because we're not that far behind everybody else, even if we lose 12 points, to be fair. So all it's going to do is it's going to galvanise the players and the manager and the fans into one, which will be a good thing for them. But as I say, they must appeal, because that's what everybody does. So it's going to go on till after Christmas, so it's just going to push it further down the road, and that's what, in all fairness, that's what most big clubs do. They push it down the road until it goes away, or if it doesn't, till in a position where they can cope with it. But if I was them now, I would just go, fair enough, let's take it now and let's finish with it then, because it's out of the way, and then we'll just go from there, because they're playing well, they're doing okay, so there's no reason why they can't go halfway up even with a 12-point deduction. So, because the Premier League is not a great league from the bottom half down, so we've got half a chance of winning that little bit of a league. So, it sounds harsh, it sounds horrendous, but if you broke the rules, you broke the rules. You've got to just suck it up, haven't you, and go, fair enough. You can look at the argument about every other club, but I think at the end of the day, you look after your own business. If you've done it, you've done it. So just crack on and make the best of it, really.
I think it's interesting what Neville's saying there. I think other clubs would look at this and think, if we're going to get in financial fair play issues, as I was saying about Jeff Shee and Wolves, they will step back from overspending, because this is what may happen in the Premier League. Written reasons. It makes it clear the cause of Everton's PSR difficulties, profit and sustainability difficulties, was the fact they overspent largely on its purchase of new players and its ability to sell other players. Basically, it was mismanaged in terms of a football team.
And I suppose, Nev, the question has got to be, how does this affect the potential takeover now, where, hopefully, you can pray there's some stability coming?
Well, I just think everybody's looking at this as a negative. it could be a real positive for Everton because, basically you're hitting rock bottom, aren't you? So hopefully there's nothing else there's no more skeletons in the cupboard to come out. So once you've got rid of this, we all know where we are. It's like sort of we're back to baseline now, so we can go again. With it hanging over your head, you never know where you stand. So any potential investors will look at that and go, I'll tell you what, okay, so we have that 12 points. We're pretty confident we'll stay up, so nothing will change. In fact, it might be better because, it's with the old board, with the old people there, so it's their fault. So when we come, it'll be a fresh start for everybody. So it could be a nice fresh start for them in lots of ways. The team, look, it ain't going to bother the players really because their job is to go out on a match day and do what they got to do. The manager's the same. The people at the top, it's been a difficult time for everybody there because there's been so much stuff going on in the background. It's been really difficult, and the club has spent billions of pounds on not getting better. So, if it was a company, I suppose we'd be in liquidation, really, wouldn't we? But yeah, look, at the end of the day, let's not see it as a negative. Let's see it as a positive. That it's the end of all the stuff and the beginning of a new start. Even if we get 4 points deducted, it doesn't matter because we've reached the end of something, the end of all the old stuff and the beginning of the new stuff. The new people come in, fresh start, get behind the team, galvanise everybody and go forward because that would be better for me than looking at it going, oh my God, it's 12 points, we're going to get relegated. We ain't going to get relegated even if we lose 12 points because there's worse teams than us.
Okay. Toffees, if Big Nev says keep your peckers up, then keep your peckers up would be my advice. Neville Southall, thanks very much for that. Let's just get a news and sport update.
Listen on BBC Sounds. This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
With the headlines, I'm Lisa McCormick. Aid agencies say they can't deliver supplies into Gaza because of a lack of fuel. The UN World Food Programme says the territory is receiving just 10% of the daily food supplies it needs. Rishi Sunak insists he's making meaningful changes to the Rwanda policy after the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, accused the Prime Minister of tinkering with a failed plan. She says the current plan will mean no exportation flights can take off before the next general election. Councils in England say extra funding from the government to tackle potholes isn't enough. More than £8 billion will be distributed to local authorities over the next 11 years. The money had been earmarked for the section of HS2 which has now been scrapped. And women could be offered counselling to help cope with some of the symptoms of menopause. Updated guidance for the NHS says talking therapy should be prescribed instead of or alongside hormone replacement therapy. With the sport now, here's Maz Faruqi.
Thank you. Let's start with that news breaking the last 20 minutes or so. Everton have been deducted 10 points after the conclusion of the independent hearing into a breach of financial fair play rules. It's the biggest sanction imposed on a team in the history of the Premier League. They move second bottom of the table with just 4 points above Burnley on goal difference. The club, as we've been hearing, have released a statement saying Everton Football Club is both shocked and disappointed by the ruling of the Premier League's commission. The club believes that the commission has imposed a wholly disproportionate and unjust sporting sanction. The club has already communicated its intention to appeal the decision to the Premier League. In Dubai, they're approaching the end of day 2 at the season-ending DP World Tour Championship. Our golf correspondent Ian Carter is there for us and can bring us the latest.
Tommy Fleetwood's just tapped in for a par at the last to complete a round of 66 that gives him a share of the lead at 9 under par alongside Nikolai Højgaard, who has 1 hole to go. Victor Hovland, another of those European Ryder Cup players as well, at 9 under par after his round of 66, and they're joined at that mark by Tristan Lawrence. All those at 9 under are 1 clear of the field. Tyrrell Hatton and Bob McIntyre nicely placed. They've got it to 7 under, so within 2 of the lead.
Thank you, Ian. Elsewhere, the Ferrari team boss Frederic Vasseur has described problems with drain covers on the Las Vegas street circuit as unacceptable. One of Ferrari's drivers, Carlos Sainz, suffered damage to his car during first practice ahead of this weekend's Formula One Grand Prix after he hit one that had come loose. The session had to be abandoned after just 9 minutes. Esteban Ocon's Alpine was damaged in the same way when second practice then took place 5.5 hours later. Sainz was second quickest behind his teammate Charles Leclerc. He will, though, receive a grid drop for Saturday's race for using a new engine after that damage. The Manchester United boss Mark Skinner says Sunday's atmosphere at Old Trafford for the WSL Manchester derby will be a pressure cauldron. It's the first time the fixture will be played at Old Trafford. Over 40,000 tickets have been sold. United's captain Katie Zellum has been past fit after a clash of heads with a West Ham player last Sunday. Skinner says it was a cut she sustained rather than concussion. He's also played down their opponent's form heading into the match, with Manchester City having suffered back-to-back defeats in the league.
I'm not reading anything into those two defeats. I think at any other day they could have beaten Arsenal, and any other day they could have beaten and should have beaten Brighton. So I know Gareth will be looking at that performance-wise and saying, look, we've dropped points, but we should be winning those games.
5 Live Sport will have commentary for you of that WSL Manchester derby on Sunday. And Tyson Fury's promoter, Frank Warren, says he has no concerns about Fury heading into his undisputed heavyweight title fight against Alexander Usyk next year, despite his unconvincing performance against the MMA star Francis Ngannou last time out. Fury was put on the canvas in the bout last month before winning on a controversial split decision.
People have off nights. He had an off night, and to be fair to Ngannou, he was a much better fighter than certainly anybody give any credit for. But look, this fight will be very competitive. Each fight is different, and you've got two guys in there who are determined to come out, be holding the 4 belts, and it doesn't get any better than this.
Fury and Usyk will fight in Riyadh on February the 17th. That's the latest from BBC Sport.
BBC 5 Live.
The voice of sport. Wales' journey to Euro 2024 qualification continues as they take on Armenia. Hear live commentary Saturday afternoon from 2. Euro 2024 qualifiers. Armenia versus Wales on 5 Live and BBC Sounds.
BBC Radio 5 Live.
The voice of the UK.
I listen to 5 Live for the football coverage.
There's a reason why so many trust 5 Live.
You're live on Radio 5 Live, the voice of the UK.
BBC Radio 5 Live. Trials on Friday.
It's just coming up to 1:15, so I hope you're looking forward to your weekend. I think it's probably fair to say Everton fans have had their weekend ruined already, and not because Everton have let them down on the pitch or about to. It's an international weekend because of this flipping 10-point deduction they've got from the Premier League. Simon Stone is still here. Just in as succinctly as you can, what have they been fined for?
Right. So basically, the Premier League have a rolling 3-year limit of £105 million that you can lose if investors fund the football club, which in this case they had. So Everton were allowed to lose £105 million over 3 years, but they lost more than that. However, they argued that some of that was to do with COVID, and they also said that the losses from COVID were allowable, but they also said there were issues with the stadium and there were losses associated with that. So they argued mitigation for the fact that they had lost more than £105 million. The Premier League, or the Independent Commission, have rejected that. The Premier League argued for a tougher sanction than 10 points, but the Commission has decided that the sanction should be 10 points. And as I said before, they've rejected the argument that it was anything other than misspending on players and not selling players for enough money, basically, to cover their losses.
So, but broadly speaking then, over a rolling 3-year period, the difference between your income and your expenditure must not be greater than, what did you say,
105 if the owners put money into the club. You are allowed to put equity into the club, but if you do, that increases the amount that you can lose. But if you do, you can't go over that 105 million.
Okay, so I mean, it's fair to say, I mean, there's limited solidarity from from around the world of football. We've got a Liverpool fan in Hook Norton, which I don't believe is on Merseyside. It's a joke that Everton got deducted 10 points when Man City haven't. Has geopolitics taken over the Premier League, with the UK not wanting to upset the Man City owners? Just on On that, Simon, is it broadly speaking, the same, this 105 million loss rule, is that what Man City are up against as well?
Yeah, I mean, I've not seen the actual details of that, but it is the same
principle.
It's the same principle but in Manchester City's case, I think there were allegations that they were hiding financial kind of transactions. They absolutely strenuously deny that. They have also been charged with not assisting the Premier League, but this is all to come out in the wash. The argument that Manchester City have not been fined, well, we haven't got to an end of that case yet, so we don't know what the conclusion to that will be. We now know what the conclusion to the Everton case is. I don't think you can really compare both. As I say, Manchester City have these 115 charges, but you speak to people at Manchester City and they argue, and I'm sure are arguing, that they have done nothing wrong.
I mean, I said we had a Liverpool fan sympathetic to Everton, a Derby fan called Matt, who's trucking around Devon, not so much. He said, my message to Evertonians is suck it up, Buttercup, try a 21-point deduction plus transfer embargoes.
That was partly for going into administration.
Yes, yeah. So again, it's slightly different, but, point taken, Matt. Has talked to an Everton fan. Marva Creel presents the Gold Digger podcast, lifelong Everton fan. Marva, look, you've heard Neville Southall say, just forget about it, you're not going to go down. So why not take that advice?
I mean, I can understand that. It does still feel unfair. I think a lot of us, when we first started to hear the rumours of a big points deduction, we were looking at the table and thought, you know what, if we're going to give it to us now. Not next season when we don't have the likes of Burnley and Luton to compete with. But either way, it's still gutting for us, especially as fans. It's nothing to do with us in that sense. Whether the Premier League are right or wrong, it's still the case of its ownership, and it's not us. And to put the punishment on the fans feels unfair.
And I mean, it's an odd thing, isn't it? Because you might argue that 10 points is too much of a deduction, but I'm better off with this 10 points now than a 3-point deduction at the end of last season would have been much less strenuous, but much more calamitous, because that would have sent you down.
Exactly. So in that sense, I still think, if you take the points now, I think we're only sort of 2 points off safety. So in that sense, if it does happen and the appeal isn't successful, then I think the whole fan base will rally around and really push our team through. But I think it's the principles that we're angry about. I mean, you were speaking about Man City there, and part of the Everton statement was saying, from now on, we're going to be keeping a close eye on similar charges because, they have 115. So if it's 10 points for this one charge, what is that going to mean going forward? It feels a little bit disproportionate to what it was. And yeah, we'll just have to see. I think also when you think about previous examples of the clubs who broke away to try and create the Super League, and the conversations there was all about let's not punish the fans, and it was a small fine. And on the basis of it, I think a lot of people would feel angry about that.
But it's just sheer powerlessness of fans here. There's nothing you can do. I mean, fans are powerless in all sorts of ways, but, fans can get managers the sack actually indirectly just by, giving them enough stick, and in the end they have to be sacked. But, I mean, as you've shown, you can't get rid of the board. I mean, if the general point here is that Everton have mismanaged, that's effectively what you've been saying anyway. Ironically, as fans, isn't it? With all your protests.
Exactly. I don't think there's anyone more critical of the ownership than us as fans ourselves. So it's hard to break that up, and I guess it's a wider conversation about where fans fit into this game now. When it's, people can just sort of take over with no real qualifications needed, in terms of running a club. It's just about what the money they have, and where's that going to lead to lots of clubs down the line, because now every club almost has to compete at that level in terms of spending to get anywhere, and you're going to see a lot more of this, of people just taking over without real experience and making wrong decisions. And not saying that's necessarily exactly what's happened in our case, but you can see it happening across the board in a lot of different clubs. And ours was one we were very critical of for many reasons. But even saying that, it's like whether it's the Premier League fault, whether it's our own owner's fault, it's us that get less of the punishment.
Simon, what does this do in terms of the potential takeover of Everton? And I think it's going to be part of one of these multi-club holdings, isn't it? Is that right? It's an organisation with various clubs around the world.
Well, yeah, I mean, there was a school of thought that if Everton were to get relegated as a result of these charges, that the price would go down. Now, as we've said, they are now in the relegation zone, but there's a long time left before the end of the season, and you would assume that they will get out of the position that they're in. So that brings a complication, because we don't know where they're going to finish. We don't know what impact it will be. And clearly, if there's an appeal, that will drag the final decision out even longer. The other issue is around the new stadium. So there are a number of uncertainties, and as I say, there's 40 pages of a judgment here that people will have to go through, and I haven't gone through it, so I don't know what the actual detail is in there, other than the Commission said that this was down to buying players, spending too much on players and not selling them for enough, and paying them too much as well. So that comes back to the kind of owners and directors test, and whether people are running football properly. So that brings us to the regulator, which is what Parliament's talking about now. So, there are a lot of issues in there to unpick. But the truth is, I don't know what material impact it will have on the potential takeover, because at the moment that is subject to an assessment by the Premier League in terms of their owners and directors test.
Another Everton fan joins us, Barry Hancock. Barry, how fed up are you out of 10?
To be honest, I've been waiting for it all week. To be honest, to receive the news when it came through, I was absolutely staggered. I mean, absolutely staggered that they could, this punishment for a breach of not even £20 million. And by all accounts, it's related to the stadium costs as well. Yeah. So I'm absolutely staggered. I mean, going on social media as well, you're seeing the same reaction across the whole fan base.
Yeah. Okay. Just sorry to break in, but Kieran Maguire from Liverpool University, football finance expert, joins us. Kieran, what do you make of this?
I think a lot of people are surprised at the extent of the points deduction. The fact that it's focused on two areas, one of which is the interest borrowed to build a new stadium, which under normal circumstances you say, well, surely building a new stadium, improving facilities, improving the competitiveness of Everton as a team in the Premier League is something to be encouraged. And secondly, there's the COVID factor as well. So Everton have ended up with a points deduction over an argument about the appropriate way of accounting for some trading transactions. So the club is clearly very unhappy, and I think that's resulted in the appeal. If the club had gone into administration, there would have only been a 9-point deduction, and local creditors and national creditors and HMRC and other parties would have lost money. So you can understand why the club's feeling so aggrieved.
But 10 points is massive, but actually it isn't, given the circumstances that they're in. Last season, 3 points would have been much more massive if it had come in at the start of May, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would. And I think the Premier League has been criticised with regards to the speed at which the independent commission was formed and the time it's taken to hear the evidence and reach a decision. And I think as a result of that, and it's no help for Everton in a sense, or the other clubs who perhaps feel aggrieved with regards to things relating to previous seasons, that it's now going to try to speed up that process with regards to charges going forwards. Where this leaves Everton, I think they're going to appeal. Where this leaves other clubs who were relegated last season, which I think the point you're referring to, we'll have to wait and see. They will be taking counsel, as will Everton, as we go forwards.
So it's going to feel, if it's going to be appealed now, it's going to feel a bit like an endless VAR check where something crucial, a crucial decision has been given, and then you find out whether it's going to be upheld. I mean, if this happens to more clubs, then are we going to end up? We're going to be more interested in what's going on in courts than in what's going on the pitch.
Well, I think that's a valid point. It could result in who's got the best accountants and lawyers rather than who's got the best football team, and that's silly. That's a crazy scenario to have to envisage. It's frustrating, and also it's frustrating for players and coaches because the managers of individual clubs, they will be setting up their team, and they were saying, well, do we need 1 point or 3 points from this game? Well, that we've now got this huge cloud hanging over the matches until the appeal is heard and the appeal verdict is taken. So it's not helping things on the pitch, and clearly it's not helping things off the pitch either.
Okay, listen, Kieran, I'm going to be on till 1:30 with this, and I won't keep you till 1:30, but I need you to stay with us until after the news and sport, because I need to drink ever more deeply from your font of wisdom. Or if you do go away, we're definitely going to get you back, Kieran. Don't desert me and Simon Stone in our hour of need. Okay, it's Kieran Maguire from the Price of Football podcast, the best podcast of any kind ever, anywhere. And if I say that, then he will surely stay with us as requested. He's just coming up to 1 o'clock.
The voice of the UK. This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
With the news headlines, I'm Lisa McCormick. The Israeli military says troops have recovered the body of a second hostage from a building close to Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza. She was a 19-year-old soldier. The hospital complex has been at the centre of Israel's military operation over the past 2 days. It claims Hamas has a command centre there, but the group denies this. Dr. Hassan Abu Sita is a doctor there.
By the early hours of yesterday morning, we had realised that we have basically run out of medication for the anaesthetic machines, and we had to stop the operating room. It's been a living nightmare, leaving 500 wounded, knowing that there's nothing left for you to be able to do for them. It's just the most heartbreaking thing I've ever had to do.
Rishi Sunak has dismissed claims from the former Home Secretary that his revised Rwanda plan isn't radical enough to work. The Prime Minister is planning to bring in emergency legislation after the Supreme Court ruled that the current plan was unlawful. Writing in the Daily Telegraph, Suella Braverman said tinkering with a failed plan wouldn't stop the boats. Here's the Prime Minister.
The progress we've made this year on tackling this issue is meaningful. The number of crossings are down by 1/3 this year, but I don't want to stop there. In order to finish the job, we've got to get the Rwanda plan up and running. I will do whatever it takes to make that happen. People are sick of this merry-go-round. I want to end it. My patience is wearing thin like everyone else's.
Two 12-year-old boys have appeared before magistrates in Birmingham charged with murdering a 19-year-old man. Sean C. Sahai was stabbed in a park in Wolverhampton on Monday evening. The two boys are due at Wolverhampton Crown Court on Monday. It's thought the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, is considering cutting inheritance and business taxes at next week's autumn statement. A Treasury source says no final decision has been made and it depends on forecasts from the Office for Budget Responsibility. £8 billion isn't enough to fix potholes in England. That's according to the local government association. The extra cash has been promised by the government. The money had been allocated to the section of HS2 which has now been scrapped. And visitors have just weeks left to see Edinburgh Zoo's giant pandas before they return to China next month. The pair came to the UK in 2011 on a 10-year loan, which was extended for 2 years as a result of the pandemic. That's a roundup of the news headlines with the sport now. Here's Maz Faruqi.
Yeah, back to that news about Everton. Everyone's looking at this as a negative. This could be a real positive for Everton. The former Everton goalkeeper Neville Southall's been speaking to 5 Live after the club has been hit with an immediate 10-point deduction after being found to have breached the Premier League's profit and sustainability rules. The deduction, the biggest sanction imposed in the history of the Premier League, moves Everton to second bottom of the table on 4 points, just above Burnley on goal difference. The club say they're shocked and disappointed by the ruling and will appeal. And Tommy Fleetwood and Victor Hovland are 2 shots off the lead after carding rounds of 66 on day 2 of the season-ending DP World Tour Championship. Nikolai Højgaard tops the leaderboard on 11 under.
How do you find a child within one of the most dangerous places on earth?
I just want him back home.
My name is Poonam Taneja, and I'm going to Syria to search for a missing boy in the ruins of the so-called Islamic State.
That's no place for them kids to grow up. My fear is that leaving them there will only create a bigger problem for this world.
What I find will take me inside the heart of IS's failed caliphate.
We're going to be stuck here forever. It's a nightmare.
Bloodlines. Listen on BBC Sounds.
It's Adrian Giles, still with you until 1:30 as we digest and try and analyse try and make some sense of this news that Everton have been deducted 10 points. 10 points for, what are we calling it? Breaches of financial fair play? Simon Stone, would that be about?
Yeah.
That'd be about right.
Yeah, they've overspent in terms of profit and sustainability. The Premier League's rules, and Everton have given their reasons for that, and they've been rejected by an independent commission, and they have been deducted 10 points, which has been reported is a record for the Premier League and puts them second bottom of the table.
And that's second bottom, but just to be clear, this. In any other season, depending where you are, certainly if they'd been deducted this time last year, it would have been, this would have been critical. I mean, in April, a 3-point deduction would have seen them off. Well, we've still got Kieran Maguire from the Price of Football podcast, also a football finance expert from Liverpool University. For those who are confused, Simon sort of explained it to us. But if you're explaining to a complete layman, what have Everton run into trouble with here? How do you express it?
Well, under the Premier League rules, you're allowed to lose £105 million over a 3-year period. If you spend money on infrastructure, if you spend money on the women's team, the community schemes, the academy, then those costs are excluded. Everton have been in the process of moving to a new stadium, and therefore they would argue that all costs in relation to the new stadium should have been excluded from the calculations. Now, the argument hinges over whether money borrowed from the club was general borrowings, in which case you'd include it as part of your FFP calculation, or was specifically in relation to the stadium, in which case you get effectively a free pass. Everton's argument was the money borrowed went into the stadium fund. The Premier League's taken the alternative view, and that means that they've breached the loss limit. The other issue is in relation to COVID. Everton have argued they'd signed a few players where the transactions hadn't worked out. Under normal circumstances, they'd have tried to move those players on after a year or 18 months. They've not been able to do so because some of those players were, for example, I think the one I think people would most focus on perhaps be the signing of Cech Tosun. He was signed for £27 million. didn't work out for the player, as happens to be the case. They would have hoped to have sold him a year later for 10, 12, 15 million pounds. And the European market had disappeared. Nobody was signing players in Europe. Nobody wanted him in the Premier League. So they ended up not being able to recover part of their investment there.
And how does this compare? And it's impossible to compare like with like. In most legal and accounting scenarios, but Man City are also facing lots of charges. Are they broadly similar in principle? What Man City are facing?
I think Manchester City's are different. The accusations which have been made with regards to Manchester City's 115 charges are A, that they've artificially inflated income, B, that they've hidden costs or they've transferred costs overseas, and thirdly, that they've not cooperated with the Premier League. Whereas Everton's, it specifically relates to a 3-year period and this £105 million limit, which... if this had happened in 2025, Everton would be fine because the rules are likely to change next season. So it is a different set of scenario for Manchester City, and Everton fans will be raising the point. Manchester City were charged earlier than Everton, and yet it's not that issue's not yet been settled. Manchester City will argue, well, if we've been charged with 115 offences, we've got to put together 115 defences, and that's going to take a long time.
Okay, but you say they're different. To my mind, they sound broadly similar. I mean, it's similar kind of issues. It's basically saying you're not spending as much money as you said you were, or you're not, or you're getting in more than you are, effectively than it looks on the books. I mean, that's essentially what it's about in both cases.
You're absolutely right, Adrian, except I think the issue with Manchester City is it goes back to around about 2009 and a series of transactions. So therefore, Manchester City will say, we need to be given additional time to be able to, A, look at the evidence which is being presented by the Premier League, and B, to put up our defence in relation to each of those 115 charges, whereas I think Everton's is a much narrower field in the sense is it very much focuses on the loans to the club and how they should be dealt with, and a couple of player transactions, whereas Manchester City's covers a much broader remit than that. So and it's going to take a long time to put together.
So who is sat in judgment in trying to get to the bottom of this? Is there presumably a load of books and, on computers and stuff like that are handed over? They examine the books. That's the evidence they look at. But who is they? It's not a jury, obviously. But that's a panel of lawyers and accountants, is it?
Yes, the Premier League Commission. I'm looking at the document here. It would appear to be Mr. David Phillips, KC, His Honour Alan Greenwood, and Mr. Nick Igo, ACA. Now, Nick Igo, I think he's a former finance director of a football club, so he's very experienced, he knows the industry, and the commission took place between the 16th and the 20th of October. So I've got the document here, and there's a separate document which appears to be dealing with the complaints by other clubs who have been relegated over the course of the last 2 seasons. And the Premier League, again, I'm not a lawyer and I'm sort of consuming this on the go, the Premier League saying, you need to wait for us to reach our judgment, and then we will see whether we feel that there's any compensation with regards to the clubs who have been relegated over the past couple of seasons.
And the appeal process, who do you appeal to? Do you go back to these 3 gentlemen?
Could you try again? Sorry, that was Siri. It's likely to be a similar, certainly people of similar experience. Whether it will be the same 3 people, that's for the Premier League Commission to decide. The whole point about having a commission is that none of these people are employees of the Premier League. The Premier League has to be seen to be independent here because it will be put under pressure by some clubs. And clearly Manchester City will say, well, we want to be given a proper opportunity to defend our position.
Thanks. Sorry, go on, Simon. You're going to.
Yeah.
Is this a question for Kieran, or I better let Kieran go? Or is this just...
No, it isn't. It was just another point that I wanted to make.
Okay, well, just make it, and then Kieran will give you a mark.
So it's been mentioned about why is this taking so long, and you mentioned about if it had been last season. Within the points, the Premier League actually asked for this case to be heard and dealt with by the end of last season. But the Commission rejected that because they said it was unrealistic to expect the proceedings and any appeal to be determined by the end of last season. So the Premier League did want it to be dealt with last season.
Okay. All right, listen, I better let you go, Kieran, because I know the whole world will want to speak to you. Thanks very much. Kieran Maguire from the Price's Football podcast. Martin Ziegler is waiting to join us. Looks at these matters for the Times, where he's the chief sports reporter. Martin, it does feel as if some kind of taboo's been broken. I never sort of thought anyone would dare to do this to a club.
No, you're right. I think it's unprecedented, isn't it, in the Premier League history? And I think it's sort of perhaps pragmatism has ruled in the past, and that I think they haven't perhaps been as rigorous in investigating things, perhaps, or not wanted to, and certainly didn't want to get into the position where they're going to be deducting points from clubs. But I think perhaps things have changed slightly. The other clubs are perhaps more adamant that they want to have these rules implemented really, really firmly, and the sort of leeway which Everton tried to claim and the sort of in their arguments about what should be viewed as losses and what shouldn't be. I think perhaps there's a general feeling within the Premier League and other clubs as well that this sort of argument can't be tolerated.
And we might be getting into conspiracy theories here, but you wonder if there's an element of this with the Premier League sort of posturing to Parliament, to the government, saying, look, we can keep our own house in order and we don't need your independent regulator.
I do think that the threat and then the arrival of the regulator has focused minds in the Premier League, and that they absolutely feel that they need to show that they can put their own house in order. So I think we haven't had the sort of quite such enormous losses as Everton have had in recent years. So this was a case that I think they had to deal with. But you're right, the regulator is definitely something which they do not want the regulators to take over implementing financial fair play or profit and sustainability rules. And at the moment, the regulator is not going to do that. And I think that's a very, very important fact for the Premier League clubs.
I mean, I suppose the issue is you start, in any matters of law, you start thinking, well, it depends how well, how much you can afford to pay lawyers and accountants to defend you from these things. And we'll get deeper and deeper into the minutiae. I think it's a bit like VAR in that respect. You think it's going to be straightforward with applying simple rules, but then, it gets less simple, the more forensic your tools are to examine it.
Yeah, I mean, if you read through the full findings of the case, I mean, it's not sort of... Everton might argue it's not cut and dried. They say one thing, the Premier League, the prosecution, as it were, say another. And they think a certain amount of money should be reviewed as acceptable losses. The Premier League say it shouldn't. So it's... and obviously looks like the independent commission has come down on the side of what the Premier League was arguing. So there is a... It's if you're an Everton fan, you might feel very hard done by. If you're a club who were relegated last season, you might think it's very unfair on you because actually Everton should have gone down last season.
I mean, Jamie Carragher has said this is excessive and not right, considering they've been working with the PL about this for the last couple of years. And the question Jamie poses: would it have been better to be evasive and try and drag it out like other clubs? Now, that's that's pointing at Manchester City, I suppose, who would deny doing anything wrong and would certainly deny being evasive. But I mean, they are dragging it out because they're charged with. You've got so many charges against them that they are arguing totally, reasonably, I suppose, that they need time to prepare all the defences.
Well, I suppose if Everton had one charge against them, and it's gone from March until November, and that for one charge. So I mean, no wonder people think it's going to be years before the Manchester City case gets dealt with, just because of the sheer number of charges there and the complexity of the fact. I mean, the Premier League has now brought in new rules. Actually, if this happens again for a sort of straightforward breach of the profit and sustainability rules, it has to be dealt with that season. So.
But there's never anything straightforward about it because you're into the weeds of accounting rules, aren't you? Whether, what you borrow to fund a stadium, the building of a new stadium, does the interest on that count and all that kind of stuff? You get into sort of Byzantine complexity very quickly.
Yeah, I think it especially for a case where there is no precedent, because this is the first one, then I actually think it's important to that now other clubs will see a sort of line drawn in the sand, and that they will know what they can spend and what they can lose, and with their eyes wide open. I think what Jamie Carragher was referring to about they've been working with them since 2021. That's true. They have. August 2021 there was an agreement between the Premier League and Everton, but according to the written reasons of the case, the Premier League made it abundantly clear to Everton that they weren't there to ensure that they abided by the rules. They would approve some transfers, but they said it was absolutely Everton's responsibility to make sure they did. And actually, perhaps were they wise to keep on signing players in the hope that they could balance the books by selling other ones? And it appears that they perhaps took a risk and ended up paying the price for it.
Just to underline Martin's point, and I've mentioned this already, the Wolves chairman, Jeff Shee, made a point at the start of the season of explaining why he felt that he couldn't sanction excessive amounts of money on transfers, and it was because he said that the club had to comply with financial fair play, and he got a lot of criticism at the time. Now, if he's putting a statement, and he's not alone, Wolves are one of 20 clubs in the same way that Everton are one of 20 clubs in the Premier League. But if Jeff Shee is saying we have to comply with financial fair play, and then a rival club doesn't comply with financial fair play or profit and sustainability, and then they are not sanctioned, well, why should Jeff Shee bother about what he's spending, or any other club for that matter? So I think, as Martin and you've said, Adrian, that the regulator is there. The Premier League have to be seen to be acting, but I think also there are another 19 clubs in the Premier League who are looking at the Premier League or looking at the Commission to say, these rules exist, do we have to abide by them? And now they know they do.
Gary Lineker, Martin, has said that with Everton being docked 10 points, it'll be very interesting to see if other clubs are sanctioned. Well, okay, we got Man City have got all these charges against them. Are you aware of anyone else who's, who might face sort of searching questions on this?
Well, I mean, Chelsea, we know are under Premier League investigation for payments they made under the Roman Abramovich ownership, but they're also, Chelsea, they've had really significant losses too. So I think they will be probably pretty concerned. I think they lost 121 million in 2021 to 22, 153 million the year before that. They're not in the Champions League this season.
But you're only supposed to, well, that's what fans don't understand, because I understand you're only allowed to lose, what was it, 105 million in total over 3 years. Well, you say they're losing more than that each year.
Yeah, I mean, some of that can be written off. Some will be like Everton did. I mean, Everton lost more than that. Everton was more than 450 million, but actually their actual breach was only meant to be 19 million. So it's lots of things you can write off for stadium expenditure, youth development, COVID losses, lots of different things. So I mean, I think we will wait with interest. I think next probably find out in January if Chelsea have managed to balance the books by selling players this summer.
I suppose another question that comes to mind is that if Everton have had this punishment of 10 points for this one breach, and much as Man City deny everything, it's hypothetically they're found guilty on all 115 charges, then how big is that point deduction going to be?
Well, I mean, I think there's a real risk of they have to be automatically relegated from the Premier League because, there's such a serious list of charges against Manchester City. The biggest points deduction I think there's been previously in English football was 30 points for Luton Town for irregular player transfers and going into administration in 2009. You would think that was a real threat if the charges are found proven.
We got a Stan Collymore has tweeted, the Premier League have taken on one of the founding fathers of English football in Everton. Everton a lot of sympathy in the Premier League dressing room, inverted commas. Should other clubs not be treated as Everton have today? Popcorn time, he says, as if he's enjoying the spectacle. Is that what he's pleading? I don't know. Well, I suppose, as you've said, Martin, there's no point having rules unless they haven't got teeth. Now, we now know they've got teeth, even though you might argue that, they're biting selectively.
Well, I mean, if you look at the fact that several other Premier League clubs tried to actually join as sort of parties to this to this action against Everton, they wanted compensation. That was turned down by the Commission. I think there's a group of about 6 clubs, some of whom are relegated, some including Leeds United, others who are still in the Premier League like Nottingham Forest. So clearly they feel that they've been playing by the rules, and if Everton haven't, then action needs to be taken.
And in terms of the government's plans, I mean, presumably it's not going to change anything about the coming of the independent regulator.
No, the regulator, as it was mentioned in the King's speech, legislation will go through early in the new year. It'll probably be a shadow regulator will be up and running probably sometime next year, but it's not going to have any power over this area. Or its duties are going to be to oversee takeovers of clubs, ensure that directors and owners are bona fide, that they've got they're not going to plunge the club into administration, that they've actually got working capital. So they're not going to be looking at this area at the moment. And I think that's very much how the Premier League want to keep it.
And you wonder whether this will have an impact on foreign owners, sniffing around buying Premier League clubs. Because if you had a sort of cynical point of view, you might argue that up to now, what's one of the attractions is that they can do more or less what they like with them. They can spend what they like or go into debt or whatever. But now it's kind of clear the rules are stricter, and it might be a bit of a disincentive.
You could actually argue the other way around. I know that the reasons the FSG bought Liverpool is that they like the idea of financial fair play rules in Europe. They like the sort of the American football model where there's very, very heavily regulated about what you can spend. So actually the fact it's not a Wild West actually might prove an incentive for overseas investors to get involved.
I think that's exactly right, and they have been trying to limit. I mean, it's fairly obvious. Even with the Super League, they were trying to raise revenues and limit expenditure. There was going to be rules involved in that. And I don't necessarily see it as a disincentive. I think it shows, as I've said, that the Premier League are going to act. I understand completely why people are saying that they'll be interested to see whether the same rules apply to other clubs. But each case, you can only deal with each case on its merits. And Everton have been found guilty and have been sanctioned. At the moment, nobody else has been found guilty.
I mean, you said, and obviously we should want it not to be the Wild West, but we tend to the bigger clubs actually, and the richer ones will be the ones more in favour of this, because if you're a smaller club and you haven't got a big backer behind you, then it makes it harder for that big backer to come in and spend the money, because they're not allowed to if you're a smaller club.
Yeah, to an extent, but I mean, look at would you call Chelsea a smaller club, because they're the ones who are probably most at risk of breaching the rules in terms of losses. I actually think it's the sort of mid-sized clubs who are the ones who are sort of, and the smaller clubs the ones who play by the rules, the ones who are sort of feel most strongly that actually an example needs to be set.
I think what happens now, somebody says by text, if this isn't resolved by the end of the season and they've gone down by 9 points, Everton, what do? Come back up if they get the 10, but they can't get the 10 points back next season. It's mad, isn't it? Or potentially mad.
Well, I think it's going to have to be resolved. I mean, they can appeal, but I don't think they can go to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. So I don't see any danger of it not being resolved by the end of the season.
But you're going to spend as much time looking, well, not as much time, but you're going to spend more time looking at these things than I don't know why you went into sports journalism, but I assume it's because you love football and you love sport. It wasn't to look at sort of legal judgment like this, was it, Martin?
Well, it was for me, actually.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's sort of happy days in...
It is fascinating.
Happy days for me,
yeah.
It is fascinating. This extension of football, and we talk about football being a business, and it is a business. Well, this is an extension of it, and I think it's fascinating to see how the regulators deal with, well, in this case, overspending.
Okay, well, listen, thanks very much indeed, Martin Ziegler. We must have a drink sometime, and you can talk me through your fascination with this area. But I appreciate all your work, because I know you've looked at West Brom's travails quite a bit, Martin. So that's Martin Ziegler of the Times. Thanks as ever to Simon Stone as well. And coming up after the news and sport, we've got a new Five Live podcast, My Mate's a Footballer, it's called, with the comedian Joe Wilkinson, and he's got Patrick Bamford with him. It is exactly 1:30.